I am Judge Judy. Today I will share my special court case in this podcast. After 43 years on the bench, I thought I had seen every type of arrogance that could walk through my courtroom doors. I've seen defendants who thought they were smarter than everyone else. I've seen people who believed their money could buy them out of anything. I've seen corruption in all its ugly forms. But on the morning of September 19th, 2024, a man walked into my courtroom with such breathtaking contempt for the law, such absolute certainty that he was untouchable, that what happened next became a lesson I'll never forget. His name was Officer Derek Paulson. He was 38 years old, a 14-year veteran of the San Diego Police Department, and he made one critical mistake that morning. He laughed at me right there in my courtroom, in front of witnesses, in front of cameras. He actually laughed when I asked him about the charges against him, and exactly 5 minutes later, his entire career, his reputation, everything he'd built over 14 years came crashing down in a way that nobody in that courtroom saw coming. But before I tell you how this all unfolded, before I show you what happens when someone mistakes patience for weakness, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is a masterclass in why nobody, and I mean nobody, is above accountability. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. Let me take you back to how this whole thing started. It was a Wednesday morning, and my clerk, Christina, handed me a file that looked straightforward enough on paper. Case number 2024 CR 9451, excessive force complaint and evidence tampering. The defendant was Derek Paulson, a patrol officer from the San Diego PD. The complainant was Marcus Webb, a 24-year-old college student studying engineering at San Diego State University. Now, Marcus wasn't some troublemaker. This young man was working 2 jobs while going to school full-time. He was putting himself through college because his parents couldn't afford it. He worked as a delivery driver during the day and stocked shelves at a grocery store 3 nights a week. He had no criminal record, not even a parking ticket. He was exactly the kind of young person you want to see succeed, the kind who's willing to work hard and play by the rules. On the night of August 3rd, 2024, at approximately 10:47 p.m., Marcus was driving home from his shift at the grocery store. He was tired. It had been a long day, classes in the morning, deliveries in the afternoon, stocking shelves until closing. He was driving his 2008 Honda Civic, a car he'd bought used with money he'd saved over 2 years. The taillight on the passenger side was out. He didn't know it. He just had the car inspected 2 months earlier and everything had been fine, but somewhere along the way, that bulb had burned out. Officer Derek Paulson was on patrol that night. He spotted the broken taillight and initiated a traffic stop on a quiet residential street. Marcus pulled over immediately. He put his car in park, turned off the engine, placed his hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. He did everything exactly right, exactly the way you're supposed to when you get pulled over. Paulson approached the driver's side window. Marcus rolled it down and said, "Good evening, officer." Respectful, polite. Paulson asked for license and registration. Marcus told him exactly where he was reaching before he moved his hands. He pulled out his wallet slowly, retrieved his license, opened the glove compartment carefully to get the registration. Everything by the book, and that's when things started to go wrong. Paulson looked at the name on the license. He looked at Marcus's face. And according to Marcus's testimony, something changed in the officer's expression. He asked Marcus to step out of the vehicle. Marcus asked why, asked what he'd done wrong beyond the taillight. Paulson's voice got harder. He said, "I'm not asking, I'm telling. Get out of the car." Marcus complied. He opened the door slowly, kept his hands visible, stepped out onto the sidewalk. Paulson told him to put his hands on the hood. Marcus did. And then Paulson started searching him, patting him down roughly, aggressively. Marcus asked what this was about. Why was he being searched for a broken taillight? That's when Paulson said something that made my blood run cold when I read it in the report. He told Marcus that he looked like someone who'd been involved in a robbery 2 weeks earlier. He told him he fit the description, that he had probable cause to search the vehicle. Marcus tried to explain that he'd been at work 2 weeks ago during whatever robbery Paulson was talking about, that he had timesheets, witnesses, proof. Paulson told him to shut up and stay still. Paulson searched the car. He went through the glove compartment, under the seats, the trunk, everything. He found nothing because there was nothing to find, just textbooks, an extra work shirt, some empty food containers from Marcus's breaks. But here's where it gets interesting, where Officer Paulson made his first massive mistake. He reached under the driver's seat and pulled out a small plastic bag. Marcus saw it clearly. Paulson was holding something that hadn't been in that car 30 seconds earlier. And Marcus did something smart, something that would end up saving him. He started recording on his phone. He'd left it on the passenger seat with the camera facing toward where Paulson was standing. The audio was clear. The video was partially obscured, but good enough. On that recording, you can hear Paulson say, well, what do we have here? You can hear Marcus say, that's not mine, that wasn't in my car, you just put that there. And you can hear Paulson laugh. He actually laughed and said, you really think anyone's going to believe you over me? Marcus was arrested. He was charged with possession of a controlled substance, cocaine, about 3.5 grams in that little bag that Paulson conveniently found. He spent the night in jail. He had to call his boss at the grocery store from the county lockup and explain why he wouldn't be at work the next day. He had to call his parents and break their hearts telling them their son, their good son, who was working so hard to build a future, had been arrested on drug charges. But Marcus had that recording, and Marcus had something else, a public defender named Rachel Moreno who actually gave a damn. Rachel listened to his story. She watched the video. She heard the audio, and she started digging. She requested the body cam footage from Paulson's uniform camera, and guess what? It malfunctioned that night. According to the report Paulson filed, his body cam had a technical issue and didn't record the traffic stop. Convenient, right? Rachel dug deeper. She found out that Officer Derek Paulson had been involved in 17 drug possession arrests over the past 2 years. All of them involved young men, mostly college age, mostly minorities. All of them involved drugs found during traffic stops for minor violations. And in 12 of those 17 cases, Paulson's body camera had mysteriously malfunctioned. Rachel brought this to the district attorney's office. She brought the recording Marcus had made. She brought the pattern of convenient technical failures. And to their credit, the DA's office started paying attention. They launched an internal investigation. They brought in the police department's internal affairs division. And what they found was stunning. They discovered that evidence from Paulson's arrests didn't match up with department logs. Drugs he claimed to have found and turned in as evidence, some of it couldn't be accounted for in the chain of custody. Weight discrepancies, missing documentation. And here's the kicker. 3 months earlier, the evidence room had been audited, and they'd found that several bags of cocaine from old closed cases were missing. Nobody had flagged it as a major issue at the time because the cases were closed and the drugs were supposed to be destroyed anyway. But the timeline matched up perfectly with when Paulson started having all these convenient traffic stop arrests. The working theory, and this is what the investigation revealed, was that Paulson had been stealing drugs from the evidence room and planting them on innocent people during traffic stops. Why? Maybe to boost his arrest numbers, maybe because he had something against young minority men, maybe because he enjoyed the power. Whatever his reason, he'd been doing it systematically for at least 2 years, and he'd destroyed lives in the process. Now let me pause here for just a second because I need to tell you something important. If this story is making you angry, if you're feeling that fire in your chest about injustice and abuse of power, good. That's exactly what you should be feeling. Channel that into action. Share this video. Let people know that these stories need to be told. Hit that like button if you believe that corrupt cops need to be held accountable, just like everyone else. By the time Marcus's case came to my courtroom, the charges against him had been dropped. The DA's office had dismissed them based on the evidence of tampering and the recording Marcus had made, but Marcus had filed a civil complaint. He was suing for false arrest, evidence tampering, violation of his civil rights, and Officer Derek Paulson was facing criminal charges, multiple counts of evidence tampering, planting evidence, filing false reports, and civil rights violations. That's what brought us to that Wednesday morning in September. When I walked into my courtroom at 9 a.m., I saw Marcus sitting in the gallery with his attorney, Rachel. He was wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, still looking like the college kid he was, but with something older in his eyes now, something harder. That's what happens when your faith in the system gets shaken. And then there was Officer Derek Paulson. He walked in wearing a suit, not his uniform. His attorney had probably advised him not to wear the badge he'd disgraced. But even in civilian clothes, he carried himself with that swagger, that absolute confidence that nothing bad would really happen to him. I've seen it 1,000 times, people who think the rules don't apply to them. I called the case. Case number 2024 CR 9451, State versus Derek Paulson. Paulson stood up alongside his attorney, some expensive lawyer named Richard Sterling, who specialized in defending cops accused of misconduct. And I have to tell you, the look on Paulson's face, it was almost bored, like this was all just a formality he had to get through before going back to his life. I asked the prosecution to present their case. The assistant DA, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Coe, stood up and laid it all out. She presented the recording Marcus had made. She presented the evidence of Paulson's malfunctioning body cameras. She presented the pattern of arrests, the evidence room discrepancies, the testimony from internal affairs investigators. It was methodical, thorough, damning. Then she called Marcus to testify. He walked up to the witness stand, was sworn in, and told his story. He described that night, the fear he felt, the confusion, the absolute helplessness of watching an officer plant evidence and knowing nobody would believe him. His voice cracked when he talked about calling his parents from jail, when he described how he'd almost lost his scholarships, how he'd almost lost everything he'd worked for because of one corrupt cop's decision to destroy his life for no reason. The courtroom was silent while he spoke. You could have heard a pin drop, and I watched Officer Paulson the entire time. You know what he did? He smirked. He actually sat there with a slight smile on his face while this young man described the worst night of his life. When Marcus finished, it was the defense's turn. Sterling stood up and started his argument. He tried to suggest that Marcus might have forgotten the drugs were in his car. He tried to imply that the recording was somehow misleading, taken out of context. He brought up the fact that Paulson had 14 years of service, commendations, a record of good arrests. Then he made a mistake. He called Paulson to the stand. Now, I don't know if Paulson insisted on testifying or if Sterling thought it would help, but the moment that officer sat down in the witness box and was sworn in, I knew we were about to see something interesting. Sterling asked him to describe what happened that night, and Paulson told his version smoothly, confidently. He said he'd pulled Marcus over for the taillight. He said Marcus seemed nervous, evasive. He said he detected the odor of marijuana, which gave him probable cause to search. He said he found the cocaine under the seat and arrested Marcus according to protocol. He said his body camera malfunctioned, which sometimes happens with technology. He said everything exactly the way you'd expect a cop who'd done this a dozen times to say it. Then it was Jennifer Coe's turn to cross-examine, and this is where things got beautiful. She asked him about the other 16 arrests with similar circumstances. She asked about the pattern of body camera failures. She asked about the missing evidence from the evidence room, and with each question, Paulson's confidence started to crack just a little. But he held it together. He had answers for everything. Technical failures happen. Coincidences happen. He was just doing his job. He was just trying to keep drugs off the street. He almost made it sound noble. Then Jennifer played the recording, the one Marcus had made. She played it for the whole courtroom. You could hear everything. Paulson's voice saying, well, what do we have here? Marcus saying, that's not mine. You just put that there. And then, clear as a bell, Paulson laughing and saying, you really think anyone's going to believe you over me? The courtroom went dead silent. Jennifer asked Paulson if that was his voice on the recording. He said yes, but tried to claim the recording didn't capture the full context, that Marcus was lying about what happened before the recording started. And that's when I decided to step in. See, I'd been watching this whole thing unfold, and I'd been getting more and more angry. Not the hot anger that makes you yell, but the cold anger that makes you very, very careful about what you're about to do. I looked at Officer Paulson sitting there in my witness box, and I asked him a simple question. I said, Officer Paulson, in your 14 years of service, how many times has your body camera malfunctioned during an arrest? He thought about it, tried to calculate in his head. He said maybe 4 or 5 times. I looked down at the report in front of me. I said, according to the internal affairs investigation, your body camera has failed to record during 12 arrests in the past 2 years alone. Before that, according to department records, it never malfunctioned once in your first 12 years of service. Can you explain that? He started to stammer. He said, technology gets old, things break down. I asked him if he'd reported these malfunctions to his supervisor. He said he'd mentioned it. I asked if there was any documentation of these reports, any work orders to fix or replace his camera. He said he wasn't sure. Then I asked him about the evidence room discrepancies. I asked him if he knew that cocaine from old cases had gone missing around the same time his arrest numbers started climbing. His attorney objected, said it was speculation. I sustained the objection technically, but the question was out there, hanging in the air. And then I asked him the question that changed everything. I said, Officer Paulson, when you heard yourself on that recording laughing and saying, you really think anyone's going to believe you over me, what did you think? And that's when he made his fatal mistake. He looked directly at me and he laughed. Not a big laugh, just a small chuckle, but it was there. And he said, Your Honor, with all due respect, I've been doing this job for 14 years. I know how these things work. It's my word, the word of a decorated police officer, against some kid with a cell phone video that doesn't show anything concrete. The arrogance in that statement, the absolute certainty that his badge would protect him, it filled that courtroom like smoke. I saw Marcus close his eyes. I saw his attorney tense up. I saw the prosecutor's jaw drop slightly. And I looked at this officer, this man who was supposed to protect and serve, who had instead used his power to destroy innocent lives. And I said, Officer Paulson, you're right about one thing. You do know how these things work. You've been getting away with it for at least 2 years. But here's what you don't understand. You're not in the streets anymore. You're not dealing with scared young people who don't know their rights. You're in my courtroom, and in here, your badge means nothing. Your years of service mean nothing. What means something is the evidence, the truth, and the law. I could see the smile fade from his face. I continued, I've reviewed the internal affairs report. I've seen the pattern of your arrests. I've seen the evidence discrepancies. I've heard the recording where you laugh at a young man whose life you're about to destroy. And I've watched you sit in my courtroom with contempt for this process, for this victim, and for justice itself. I turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Coe, I'm ready for your sentencing recommendation. She stood up, and I could see she was trying to hide a smile. She recommended the maximum sentence on all charges to be served consecutively, not concurrently. Paulson's attorney jumped up. He started arguing for leniency, talking about his client's years of service, his family, his spotless record up until these allegations. But I'd heard enough. I looked at the evidence in front of me. The criminal charges against Paulson included 4 counts of evidence tampering, 4 counts of filing false police reports, 4 counts of civil rights violations, and 1 count of perjury for lying under oath in previous cases. Each count carried potential prison time, but before I gave my ruling, I wanted to say something for the record. I wanted everyone in that courtroom, everyone who would ever hear about this case, to understand something fundamental. I said, there are few betrayals worse than the betrayal of public trust. When a police officer, someone we give a badge and a gun and authority over our lives, abuses that power, they don't just hurt their immediate victims. They hurt every good officer who puts on that uniform honestly. They hurt the relationship between law enforcement and the community. They hurt the very foundation of justice. I looked directly at Paulson. You took an oath to protect and serve. Instead, you terrorized. You planted evidence on innocent people. You destroyed lives to pad your arrest numbers or satisfy whatever darkness drove you to do this. You laughed when you thought you were untouchable. You're not laughing now, are you? He wasn't. His face had gone pale. The arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the dawning realization of what was about to happen. I delivered my ruling. Guilty on all counts. And then I handed down the sentence. 8 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 4 years. His peace officer certification permanently revoked. A $50,000 fine to be paid to Marcus Webb in addition to any civil damages. And a requirement that upon release, he register with the state as someone who had committed crimes under color of authority, essentially a registry for corrupt cops. The courtroom erupted. Paulson's face went from pale to red. He started to stand up, started to say something, but his attorney pulled him back down. Marcus put his face in his hands, and I saw his shoulders shake with sobs, but they were tears of relief this time, tears of vindication. And here's the thing that made it all worth it. 5 minutes. From the moment Paulson laughed at my question to the moment I brought down my gavel on his sentence, exactly 5 minutes had passed. I'd timed it later when I reviewed the courtroom recording. 5 minutes to go from smug and untouchable to convicted felon facing 8 years in prison. His career wasn't just over, it was obliterated. He would never wear a badge again. He would spend years in prison, and let me tell you, corrupt cops don't have an easy time behind bars. Other inmates don't take kindly to people who abused the authority of the badge. He would lose his pension, his reputation, everything. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked back at me one time. The arrogance was completely gone. All that was left was a broken man who finally understood that actions have consequences, that nobody is above the law, and that laughing at justice is the fastest way to feel its full weight come down on you. After the sentencing, Marcus approached the bench with his attorney. He thanked me, but I stopped him. I told him he didn't need to thank me. I told him he'd done something incredibly brave by recording that stop, by standing up for himself, by refusing to let a corrupt officer destroy his future. I told him that he represented everything good about our justice system, a citizen who trusted that the truth would eventually come out, who had faith that accountability was possible. Marcus graduated from San Diego State 18 months later with his engineering degree. He got a job at an aerospace company in Los Angeles. He's doing well. He's building the life he worked so hard for. And Officer Derek Paulson is serving year 3 of his 8-year sentence at a state correctional facility. The San Diego Police Department launched a comprehensive review of all of Paulson's arrests. They found 11 cases where evidence tampering was likely, 11 innocent people whose cases were reopened, charges dismissed, records expunged, 11 lives that were damaged by one corrupt cop's actions. The department also implemented new policies, mandatory body camera reviews, regular evidence room audits, and a whistleblower protection program for officers who witness misconduct. But here's what I want you to take away from this. This didn't happen because I'm some special judge with special powers. This happened because one young man was brave enough to record what was happening to him, because one public defender cared enough to dig deeper, because prosecutors were willing to go after one of their own when the evidence was clear, because the system, for all its flaws, can still work when people refuse to accept that some individuals are above accountability. You might not ever be in Marcus Webb's situation. You might never have to stand up to a corrupt cop or fight false charges, but you will face moments in your life where you see something wrong and have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. You will encounter people who abuse their power and count on everyone being too scared or too tired to challenge them. In those moments, remember this story. Remember that truth is powerful. Remember that evidence matters. Remember that courage, even when you're terrified, even when the odds seem impossible, can change everything. And remember that 5 minutes is all it takes to go from untouchable to accountable when you finally stand before real justice. If this story moved you, if you believe that corrupt cops need to face the same accountability as everyone else, I need you to do something. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, leave a comment telling me about a time you witnessed justice being served, and watch the next video on your screen where I'll tell you about another case that will restore your faith in the system. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, in my courtroom and in this world, nobody gets to laugh at justice. Nobody is above the law, not ever.